Welcome to the Psycho Studios podcast. We're coming from the desert, Phoenix, Arizona. The summer weather did not want to let go. We saw the cooling temperatures finally. I mean, it's crazy how even now it's still getting up there, but 85 was our high yesterday, so I can't complain. The summer weather, it's finally over. And now we're in the week of October. The beautiful weather has finally arrived. And I'm Mr. Z, and I'm with Mr. W. We are a son and father duo, bringing an old school contemporary twist together. This is the third episode of our podcast, and we thank you for listening.
It did sound like you might have been complaining a little bit yet about the weather there. I don't know if you can back off from that.
I'm just thankful that it's, finally not in the 90s.
No, I know, and that's the perspective, right? And I did get tired of it. This was probably the first summer in the 30 summers I've been here where I really did. I'd had it. Never had a July like that. Never had the heat extend this deep into October. And you're a native to the desert, so I get that. You are part rattlesnake, so that's quite fitting. And we're gonna talk to our psychos today, cover the gamut, as it were. And we definitely want to let the audience know that we're really our main focus is the TV and film production company, Psycho Studios. And we focus on the horror genre, but we're open. We're combining this awesome and entertaining podcast on our newsletter, Psycho Studios, The Sprinkler, with our production company to encompass a well rounded entertainment hub. We're creative, common sense based, with a big helping of intelligence and practical life experience. Do you want to give a rundown on the topics or subjects we're going to cover?
Yeah, here's just a quick view. We do cross, a little bit more boundaries than just this, but our main points is film, music, autos, some sports, wellness, commentary, practical life skills, and headlines.
Yeah, no, let's never forget the headlines, right? I think the world revolves around headlines, and we don't want to deprive them of that.
Yeah, our last podcast we didn't really get to that. We ran a little bit long, but we're gonna try to condense what we did last time for sure.
Definitely a work in progress. Mr. Z on the board, running all the technical aspects of this and gets us set up in a hurry and keeps us on point. So definitely appreciate that. We're going to remind our audience that we're going to leave politics at the door. I know that does take a chunk out of some of the things that we can talk about, but we want to be entertaining, thoughtful, and add value to all of our listeners out there. And we want to kind of have a space for our listeners that's conversational in format. Put the negative news and the negative weather on pause for the most part. Some headlines you can't get away from as far as them being dire, but we're not going to beat you over the head with things being negative all the time. I want to give you all a moment to stop scrolling as you listen or maybe go through our newsletter. Yes, you might have to do a little scrolling with the newsletter, but we're going to keep it sharp. The podcast is usually around an hour, and just have everybody take a deep breath. We're going to share gratitude and appreciation along with humor, and as Mr. Z loves it when I say, involving the little things. We dropped our second chapter of our newsletter on October 1st. We're calling it Psycho Studios the Sprinkler. Each chapter will be fun and entertaining and contain practical life skills to help our listeners in their month to month living. We want to help our listeners save money and time and minimize the headaches that can arise in our day to day. We'll be dropping this monthly podcast on the first of each month as well. The newsletter will be delivered at the start of each month, and Mr. Z is behind making sure all that gets published. And we do send a heads up out via Insta and X, formerly known as Twitter.
And if you subscribe on our website, you will also get a notification through email letting you know that the newsletter was updated and added.
I love that part. And as a matter of fact, one of my former coworkers texted me last night and she said she had subscribed and she was really excited about it. So, got to start somewhere. I like that touch. Great call out there about the subscription piece. Do you want to kick us off with a special quote, which is the way we kind of like to start these?
Sure thing. There is no terror in the bang, only anticipation of it. And that was from who?
Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes, I, I think you've said multiple times that one of your favorite movies is Psycho, and I mean, funny enough, our company name has to revolve around Psycho. It's much deeper than that, but I mean, he in the horror genre to acting, I mean, it's second to none what he did for the industry.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. We'll have to go into that story a little bit more in depth as we make our way through this. But as Mr. Z said, there's a lot more to it than that. But I remember we came across the image of an old movie marquee, and it shows this guy on a ladder, and he's putting up the red letters on a white background, and it says Psycho. And that really was the seedling for the idea for our TV and film production company and these offshoots such as the podcast and the newsletter. So definitely um, give a shout out to Hitch, as some call it, called him back in the day. And let's jump right into film. So we're coming out of our favorite month of the year. We have Halloween and all the scares that it can bring. Let's talk about the so-called holiday. So we started off, we Saw 10, and I suppose that doesn't sound right. So we viewed Saw 10, and here are our thoughts. So, Mr. Z, let's start with you. Would you share with the audience your rating for Saw 10?
I definitely went into it, unfortunately, with too much of a high hope. I thought it was going to be more of like return to formula, and then we got Tobin Bell back, and I mean that's one of the biggest franchise problems that they had is that they killed him off way too early. But I mean he had an aggressive cancer, so it made it a strong point, anyways. But even reflecting back, watching Saw 2, it's pretty tragic how bad that movie is. But moving back to the most recent Saw that was released, it's a three across the board. The music, where was it? I mean, that was like an integral piece of the older Saw movies, and the same person did the music. So I couldn't even tell you what that was about. And then the only thing that was good is seeing Tobin Bell back, and then kind of seeing, why he did more what he was in pursuing of trying to make people be better, even though obviously it's much more twisted than that. But it didn't work, and I feel like they're gonna try to do like a Saw 2.5 now after this, but I don't think it did very well. It did better than Spiral, but that's not hard to see past that. What
Yeah,
would you give it?
yeah. No, I came in just a hair under you at 2.5. I used to just stick with whole numbers, but with the way the movies have been recently in the last 18 months or so, I feel like I've had to go to quarter and half points. I echo a lot of the sentiments. As you know, we talked about the movie at length afterwards. I felt the movie was weak, really, in all aspects, and you had said pretty much the same sentiments just now. The story, the dialogue, most of the acting, even the pace, I give it a big yuck. And it was good to see Tobin Bell back, but I just it was just such a poor showing. And I did try to temper my expectations as well, but it's such a great story. And I'll be honest with you, I thought the movie was confusing and just didn't even approach the other saws. I'll take the worst of the rest. I'd even watch Spiral over that.
Yeah, that's no good to hear.
Yeah, so we're gonna come out of Saw 10. We probably spent too much time on it as it was. It's kind of like reliving some sort of tragedy. So we're gonna get past that. And I just wanted to give a shout out to myself that I've been watching a horror movie a day in October. And you know what they say, a horror movie a day keeps the ghouls away.
Yeah, I was reading that you wrote that. I was cringing inside, but I guess that works.
That's the old school versus contemporary, right? So, do you want to give the audience a quick rundown of the movies that I was making my way through?
The movies you watched. Why would I speak on behalf of someone that I didn't even watch? I've watched these movies, but it's what I'm looking at this list. It's really cool that most of them are a creature feature, or I should say a monster feature, because some of them are human.
Yeah, you see how it starts out with Dr. Phibes, the Vincent Price classic?
And then The Blob, The Descent, which I think out of all these movies, it's kind of weird that that's thrown in there because I think that's very different than all the other movies on this list.
It does jump out.
And then Friday the 13th, Creature from the Black Lagoon. And then I like how you sum this in. Other Universal classics. That's funny.
Well, there was a lot, so
All right. And then Scream. And then some Hammer films.
again, there was a lot.
So that's not saying much there. Halloween. And then Halloween from Rob Zombie. And Sleepaway Camp 2.
Ooh, is that bad?
The first one's unwatchable, so the second one,
It's double unwatchable.
I'm definitely gonna get hate for that because I know some people like think that's like a very cult classic.
Yeah, I wish I would have actually slept the night away rather than slept away Camp 2.
That's funny. The Ring, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then the remake from 2003, which I believe jump started a huge, really cool path of introducing like remakes. I think that it's done way better than Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Wow, those are fighting words. We won't get into it right now, but definitely, and don't forget, shout out to Jessica Biel.
Whatever that means, the Conjuring series, and then The Invisible Man, which is unwatchable from 2020, if you ask me. But
It's the kind of movie it's interesting because we don't have to agree on movies, of course. A lot of times we have parallels, but we definitely beg to differ on that one. I enjoyed it. Think it's really solid, and I don't even like the actress that stars in it. Good old Peggy from Mad Men. So for me to like that, I think it's James Wan style that really draws me to it. And there's been such you talk about reimagined films when you mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre. um, it's Zack Snyder, right? He did Dawn of the Dead. You look at how they reimagined those films, even Evil Dead, that you turned me on to that remake, if you want to call it, that was done so well. But Universal is so lost. Should we talk about Tom Cruise and The Mummy?
it's great, as I still have yet to see that, and I'm thankful.
Okay. You should be, in that one movie where the guy yells out, "My eyes." That's what you'll be doing after you watch that. So, Mr. Z, why don't you share some horror favorites that you've either watched recently or stumbled upon on social media?
I don't know about social media, but I always have to watch the remake of The Thing at least once or twice a year. There's just something about that movie. I've even seen it several times, believe it or not, at the actual movie theaters. Even though that movie, when did that come out? I can't think of it on top of my head.
I think it's 1982.
Yeah, it's just something that I always go back to for sure. Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely something that I definitely revert back to and always seeing. And believe it or not, we actually just went to go see that at the theater. Speaking of seeing it at the theater, it was such a great experience. Other than the fact that they forgot to turn the lights off for the first 5 minutes of
Oh
the movie.
boy. And that was the first time you'd seen the original at the theater, son?
At the theater, yep.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I saw the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street at the theater. And man, do I wish that I could unlive that.
Yeah.
But I
Ooh,
mean,
that is a rough one.
it's a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie. How am I not going to see it?
Yeah. Even with Jack Earl something. Just
And
horrible.
something I just recently rewatched again that I think, yes, it does have some holes, but is Candyman. I think even now it still holds up. I mean, if you saw the remake, the new one,
Mm.
can't even say what the hell that was.
It's just I want to know how those studios and producers and that they sit down and they go over those ideas and they say, "Yep, we're going to green light that." Like, why do those guys have all the money to do that when they put out what they put out? I'm going to jump in on a couple of things. So, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing is in my top 25 favorite horror movies of all time, and it was the last film that Mr. Z's mother and I watched before we moved from the Midwest to the desert. So it definitely has a special place for me on multiple levels. And going to the theater and seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street with Mr. Z in that big presentation as it was meant to be seen was really incredible and just reminded me how great that particular feature is. I'm not a huge fan of the franchise because of what they did with it, but the original is just so spot on. It's really something. And if you get a chance to see any of those movies that you find iconic from your childhood or young adulthood, and you can see them at the theater, you should definitely do so.
It's worth it, and they're usually cheaper.
Right, that's the thing, right? In this day and age, when we're trying to save a buck, what was it, $5 a ticket plus the fees?
Correct.
Yeah, and so you can't beat that, right? And then it's that still that experience. And then if you bring in a big enough purse, you can just shove all your snacks in there. So you can definitely save some money.
Not condoning that, but it may have something I've done several times. I'm saying I have a purse, maybe.
I don't know. That's the way that came across. Was it a Merce?
Yes.
Okay, Zach. And so a few other random horror suggestions that we have on our list. And Mr. Z, want to read those off and let me know if you've seen any of them?
It's alive. Better watch out. Ouija and Elden Lake.
Eden Lake.
Eden Lake.
Yeah.
Okay.
So have you seen any of those?
Negative.
Yeah. And so It's Alive won't give a huge synopsis on any of these, but It's Alive, you're talking early to mid 70s, right around the time Texas Chainsaw Massacre had come out. And it is about a baby that goes on a killing spree after it's born. It is so over the top. Definitely recommend it to any horror fan if you haven't seen it. Eden Lake was a surprising feature. I'm pretty sure it's Australian, but sometimes I mix up the Australian movies with New Zealand. Definitely a watch. Twisted. It's always good to see movies that maybe are from another country, especially in the horror genre. Ouija surprised me. I know there's been many iterations of that, but the original is a solid horror film on a low budget. And better watch out. Another one of those, I believe that one's on Netflix right now, and it's surprisingly good. Try not to read about it, do any type of story synopsis about that because it could ruin the ending, but definitely worth it. Any you want to share with the audience before we move on?
No, I'm good.
You are good. All right. In the Did You Know category, the movie Smile starring Sosie Bacon, and I'm pretty sure I say her name correctly, Sosie, Sosie. Yep, she is Kevin Bacon's daughter, along with Kira Sedgwick. Enjoyed the movie. I rated it a solid 7. And did you want to throw a rating out to Smile? I know we saw it a while ago.
Yeah, I definitely give it a 7 as well. It's I wanted so much more from it. It felt like it was definitely pulling a lot of other movies to make the movie it is. But sometimes with the horror genre, some movies have to crawl for movies like that to be like a running hit.
That's a good one. Crawl before you run. I'm not sure how that saying goes, but you're right. I definitely left wanting more. Were you aware that that was Kevin Bacon's daughter?
Yes, I was.
Wow. All right, good for you. I'm going to say that Sosie was better than So with her acting and Smile, and I feel she outpaced her dad and mom from an acting standpoint. Quick trivia for you, Mr. Z. What was Kevin Bacon's first horror feature?
So I mean, can you classify that as horror? Tremors?
Nope, that wouldn't be it.
So Invisible Man?
Nope. No, that would be Hollow Man. And wait,
Oh, my bad. I could just completely blank. The original Friday the 13th. That was
yes,
terrible.
thank you. So, seeing as how you had, what was that, like a fever dream or something, fever
Yeah.
blister?
I was reading a list the other day of what people would rate those iconic horror movies, and Friday the 13th was always the top, and I just didn't understand that.
People love themselves some Friday the
And I
13th.
just, to me, the first one, and all of them aren't that great, but they're really forgettable, if you ask me.
No, they are, except for the iconic killer, right?
Yeah.
So, let's talk real quick. Tell the audience. So, Kevin Bacon's first horror feature was Friday the 13th, the original. What's the iconic scene that horror fans loved in that flick with Kevin?
When he's laying on the bed, and Tom Savini
Special effects makeup artist Tom
under the
Savini.
bed, kind of like stabs. I forget what exactly. I think it's an arrow.
Yeah, deer head arrow. Yeah.
And like directly like stabs it through like his throat and through the other side. I mean, it was pretty amazing practical effects. Don't get me wrong.
It was
but
1980, right?
Right.
1980. And we're talking Kevin Bacon. Nobody knew who he was. He had, of course, the reason why he gets killed is he had just had promiscuous sex with his girlfriend, right? So she's heading off to the restroom and he's about to spark a J. So he's got a double whammy, right? He just had promiscuous sex and now he's going to do drugs. And as trippy as that scene is when the arrow comes up through his trachea, it's that simple gesture of that hand reaching up and holding down his forehead.
Totally.
It gets me every time. So as far as Mr. Z rating Smile, the same as myself at a 7. We will wrap this up by saying the movie had a fairly high budget for a horror film with a small cast. I was surprised to see it came in at 17 million and it grossed over 217 million. Are you kidding me?
I think the best actor. It's sad, I should have looked, but the actor from The Boys that plays A Train, I believe he's a really standout, even though he's not in it very much. But I think he's perfect to push kind of her into the more fever dream that she was already living in.
Hey, that is a great call out. He was really good in that. And if I was shooting a film and I had a smaller role that I wanted to have impact, I would put him in it right away. I know we should probably know his name and not just call him A Train, but that is a great call out. He was really, really solid with that. Do you want to talk about the upcoming Thanksgiving with the audience?
Yeah, so there's a movie that's coming out towards Thanksgiving, and
What's it called?
I think it's called Thanksgiving, believe it or not.
Nice. I'm confused.
But to me, he's made some really phenomenal films with such a small budget.
Who's that?
His name is Eli Roth.
Nice.
And there's something about his movies. Still one of my favorites.
Knock Knock
is Cabin in the Woods.
All right. Cabin
No,
Fever.
it's Cabin Fever.
You son of a.
I always say that because there's like, what is there, 29 names with Cabin?
Cabin 39.
So, anyways, the film is, so there was a movie it was called Grindhouse, and it was from 2007, and there was a trailer that was in there. It was like a mockery of this pretend movie that
Trailer
Roth
in the
wanted to
movie,
make.
right? Within the movie. Yeah.
Right. And it was about a killer turkey, and it was going around and it was killing people. But he kind of took that idea of that trailer and now is turning into a full-fledged horror movie. And no, the turkey is not the killer in this movie.
That's awesome. And who directed Grindhouse?
Well, not all of it. So that's
Okay,
why
parts of it, or at least
only
produced it
one-
all.
He produced it all, but he only made one
Segment.
with-
You got it. So
with
okay.
Kurt Russell,
Produced it. So who was it?
Quentin Tarantino.
Right. So clearly there is some collaboration too with him and Eli Roth, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that they've collaborated in years.
No, it's definitely been a while, right? They Inglorious Bastards, we saw that Eli Roth can act, and then Tarantino was a producer on Hostel, which kind of changed that whole torture horror porn, if you want to call it that. So they definitely had some energy back in the day.
Well, with his help, that's what also helped move and make that movie come to fruition too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're going to review Thanksgiving and not the meal, but we might do that too. But definitely the movie, the fact that we're going to be able to see something twisted by Roth over the holidays, that does seem to be case in point. That used to be taboo, and then we've seen the last couple of Christmases there are horror movies related around it. So be interesting to see what that movie holds for us, and we'll be reviewing that as we move forward. Random horror related. One quick thing I want to say. We talked about this. So there was a Friday the 13th in the month of October 2023. And you'll see from 2000 to 2020, there were only 12 Friday the 13th. So there have only been 4 October Friday the 13th since that 20-year span. And the next one is until 2028 for those of you that love Friday the 13th and or the relationship it can have in the month of October. Any thoughts on that before we escape that piece?
I do love the there is like some kind of notion of 13 being like a bad or evil number or unlucky.
Yeah.
And then, it only occurs so often in our yearly calendar. And then spook season having that number together, and the fact that that doesn't happen very often is, I think, all awesome things. And then if you're into tattoos, usually on Friday the 13th they do flash tattoos. So it's all funny things, interrelated, and I think it's all great because I love all that shit.
Yeah, no, good point. I love that shout out about the you called them flash tattoos. Let's not forget also, I don't think you can have any presence right now if you have a podcast, a commercial, some sort of TV show without mentioning Taylor Swift. So shout out for Taylor because her favorite number is 13.
Good for her.
Absolutely. So we watched Barbie, the movie, right? And we'll share our rating and review in our newsletter, The Sprinkler. All I can say is wow. Do you want to drop one word about Barbie before we move forward?
Disappointing.
Okay, that's another good word for that. So let's there we're gonna cover real quick some classic horror films that were released in October over the last 75 years in our newsletter. So we're gonna break it down a little bit more. Here's a few movies that came out in October in varying years. Do you want to run through those real quick?
Sure. The Fly, the remake, Scanners,
Yes.
Halloween. Thank God that actually was released on Halloween, 1978. And many other Halloween films in the franchise were released on Halloween. And then Possession.
Nice. Shout out to Sam Neill.
That is such an insane movie. If anyone has not seen that, please watch it at least once in your life.
I almost think that we need to do a full blown review on that because we need to bring that to prominence.
I don't think a lot of people have. I've only seen one good podcast that talked about it,
All right, I'll
and
mark it down.
they seem like they were all crazy too. So,
Got it.
and then Nightmare on Elm Street, many Friday the 13th films, Nightmare, Dream Warriors, Near Dark, Fright Night,
Yep, right, right.
Candyman, 1992.
Believe it or not, that says Blackula.
That's great. And then Silver Bullet. I'm glad I was able to list that one instead.
Yeah, so Blackula, I'll let the audience look that one up, but it was a 70s black exploitation film about, you guessed it, a black Dracula. So not even gonna go down that rabbit hole. And then Silver Bullet, brought to us by the novella by Stephen King. It's a horrible movie, but it did come out in that same month period over the span of many years. So we've wrapped up our first script and are going over final edits. We've received confirmation from the U.S. Trademark Department, aka the Library of Congress, that our 6 treatment outlines feature film ideas have been approved for copyright. So just giving the audience an update on that. Any thoughts on that before we move into music?
I mean, at you starting this adventure, you think, you know, things are going to move really quickly, and you think, oh, I'm not talking about instant gratification, but you think that things would move along more smoothly and done, because we had like this vision in our heads, and usually when we have visions, things get done. But to say that even at this time that we've done as much as we have is it's pretty exciting. But the fact now that we finally have our outlines copyrighted, and this is, I feel like, our final step into moving into the big leagues or the big time. It's very exciting. It's a little nerve wracking to me just because what does it all mean? And then also, does that actually mean that we have to, you know, meet with people, or do we only do Zoom meetings? There's so much to that, but I'm so glad to be along this journey and see what this all has in store. Even if nothing comes to it, just to be able to go through all this journey and at least try it and say that we did it is great.
Great points. I'm confident things will come from this. The more we move forward, there are so many breadcrumbs that we come across that just show that we are moving in the right direction and it's being ramped up. And I think the hardest part that a lot of artists that write struggle with, you see it all the time in articles and books, YouTube clips, what have you. They have a hard time getting that pen to paper. And oddly enough, that is not an issue for us. And I think that's a huge element that we have the creative juices always flowing, and some really good feedback there from Mr. Z. And we'll keep our audience in tune with where we're headed with that. It's all good stuff. So we're going to jump into some music. Do you want to kick that off?
Sure thing. So now it seems like you know, weeks ago, but it's kind of sad that it actually has. But we actually had just seen Avenged Sevenfold, and there's so much to that. You go to a concert, you just want to see the concert you're going there to see, and sometimes to me it's really miserable. And unfortunately, we not unfortunately, but we did miss the first headliner, and then we unfortunately had to sit through Falling in Reverse,
Oh boy, and I was falling in reverse.
and just going through all that, and it seemed like there was tons of fans there for that. So,
Knew every word to every song.
and thankfully that was only an hour set, and it was about 30 minutes until Vince Sunfold came on, and I was su- pleasantly surprised. It had been years since I got to see them last because they had been on a long hiatus, and COVID didn't help that at all either. But I was pleasantly surprised that they actually played so much of their old music, and then it was really they did a great job of combining their old with their new, and then ending the set with their old. I'm sorry, with their new music. I think that all fit really well. I wonder if that was the plan all along, or they just came up at a spur of the moment. What was interesting enough, though, is that they had a concert the night prior, and they had to unfortunately call it off. M Shadows, the lead singer, woke up and couldn't even say a word, and so he injected his throat through a doctor with steroids, and still couldn't sing, talk. So they had unfortunately had to call it off an hour before the show. He did try everything he could, but unfortunately they still had to cancel the show. And believe it or not, even though he still had that problem, he was still able to sing. His voice wasn't 100% there, but he still gave it his all. And I mean, that's more than I can say a lot of other artists. Most of them these days, I feel like, are singing over their own voice.
Yeah, good stuff for sure. And yeah, unfortunate for the California, and I don't know what city it was again, but where that concert was ultimately canceled. And thankfully, the next night, here they are in Phoenix. And you definitely have more of an acute ear when it comes to Sevenfold and primarily M Shadows and his singing. But for me, he was amazing, even if I took that element of his voice issues out of it, and the fact that he just belted out song after song after song. And if you know their style at all, you have kind of older sounding rock along with this contemporary, very artistic style of rock. And he was just hitting every note. And so I just, there were some interesting hiccups within the concert itself, which we expand upon in the newsletter. But for me, it meant a lot because Avenged Sevenfold is probably one of those only groups that Mr. Z turned me onto back in the day, as opposed to me turning him onto music from when I was younger. And I just love them almost as much as he does. And they have such a unique sound, and their energy in the concert was really second to none. And I won't forget that concert anytime soon. So, really good stuff. And thanks for sharing your thoughts on that, Mr. Z.
Uh,
Anything else?
well, I just was gonna say, let's go over some suggestions to listen to or revisit, but kind of go over a little bit quickly
Okay,
instead of going into some detail. But
sure.
definitely, you know, if they haven't listened to them or haven't listened in a long time, please do.
Sure, that we'll start with Alter Bridge from '04 and formed by former members of the group Creed. We've got 6 a.m. from 2007, formed by Nikki Sixx, Motley Crue bassist, and Live. I was listening to them last night, as a matter of fact, not live, but I was listening to Live.
I don't get it.
And that can I know that's it's like who's on first. But from 1984, that was a group that back in the day you couldn't turn a radio on. Yes, you turned radios on without hearing them. And you talk about the song Lightning Crashes, definitely a different sound for that mid 80s to late 80s era. Give them a listen if you haven't. Filter from 93. Good old Richard Patrick, founder and lead vocalist. He was a touring guitarist for NIN, believe it or not. And their big hit, Hey Man, Nice Shot. Tell me, was that about Kurt Cobain like the legend goes, Mr. Z?
I do not think so.
It it absolutely was not. And tell us, who is Richard Patrick, the lead singer from Filter, related to, that the audience might know?
See, I throughout my entire life you've talked about that, but I can't think of it
So
now.
think about Arnold and Cameron in that movie. And we make the joke about, what's is there something wrong with Wolfie? So it's Robert Patrick from Terminator 2. That's his claim to fame, right? Have you seen this boy?
Right.
So that is his brother, Robert Patrick. And I got him again because he's right. I do mention that one since he was a little kid. We'll wrap up some other groups to listen to. Actually, we have one left, and that's Seether. I know that was a group that Mr. Z and I definitely aligned with. Technically, they came out in 1999 as a group, but in the US, they broke in '02, changed their name to Seether. And can you tell everybody what country they were from?
South Africa.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I was really surprised, and I bet you they talk with an accent. I don't know if I've seen them interviewed, but they don't sing with it. So,
They don't because Elon Musk is even from South Africa.
right, right. It's weird, right? So, three quick songs that were huge hits for Seether: Fine Again, Broken, and then my favorite, Remedy. If you haven't listened to them either before or in a while, I'd hit up those groups. So, let's jump into some autos. I'm going to quickly run over my favorite. I promised the audience I would do this for the podcast. We go into some more details in the newsletter, but my favorite iconic American vehicle is the '57 Chevy Bel Air. Never owned one. I plan on owning one someday. And as the years have passed, I've just grown to really love and appreciate that classic. Basically, 55 to 57 Chevy Bel Air and Nomad, which was the two-door wagon, which was unheard of back then when everything was huge and had multiple doors, and the classic 283 V8. The fuel-injected version in '57 was the first time in a passenger car that the engine reached an advertised 1 horsepower per cubic inch. No, that seems like nothing today, but at the time, it was all the rave, and well into the '60s and even early '70s. Listen to the transmissions that were available in '57. You had the 3-speed manual. Believe it or not, that was the only manual available.
Was that on the tree or was that actually?
So I did research that because I knew you were going to ask that. And from what I could see, that was a 3-speed on the floor when you talked about the '57 Bel Air with the V8. The 3 on the tree was reserved for that 6 that was just basically a boat anchor. You could also get a 2-speed power glide. Mr. Z has not experienced one of those. I had one in my '66 Chevelle. They were known as a slush box. It's just a horrible transmission. It's an automatic. It's got 2 gears. If you can imagine that, it just all it does is wind out in first. It's horrible. And they were introducing, GM, specifically Chevy, the 3-speed turbo glide. That was the 3-speed automatic, and believe it or not, it was just a $50 option in 1957 to get that much better, not only performance automatic, but that thing was bulletproof, as they like to say about some engines by Jeep. So definitely just an iconic vehicle to me that I've never really been around, but I've always loved. And I think I'm that same way with Margot Robbie. So anything you want to comment on the '57 Chevy before we move into yours?
I can't get over the fact that it was only a $50 option. Stuff like that is so interesting to always hear stuff like that. It just gives you in perspective that we're still taking up the chin. Everything gets expensive, but yet here we are not making more money.
Yeah, exponentially. We just have never kept pace. That's a great call out. So, Mr. Z, tell us about one of your faves, the Jeep Cherokee 4x4 4-liter, which was available in the iteration we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about the bastardized use of the name Cherokee in the newer models, but from 1994 to 1996 and then '97 to '01. What do you want to share with the audience? We went into more detail in the newsletter, but give the audience some insight.
The Cherokee was around a lot longer than that, but and it also had the 4.0, but it was AMC. But if we're just talking about
American Motor
if we're
Classics.
talking about the Chrysler, that is when that was pushed into fruition. But I would say my favorite of that is the one that I have is the 2000 two-door 5-speed with 4x4. I mean, there's nothing else like it, especially when you lift it and get on some good tires.
And that one has the 4 liter as well, right?
Right, it's got the 4.0. But the unfortunate thing is the 2000 to 2001, the production of the 4.0 unfortunately had a big problem with their sand casting for the heads, and there was a weak point usually around the 4 and 5 cylinder, and unfortunately, like mine, it cracked,
Mm.
and so that leads into your coolant going into your oil, and I'll
No
tell you what,
bueno.
that is not what you want. And unfortunately, I had to get another one after replacing the first one myself because unfortunately they sent me not a very well done fix of the head because unfortunately they do not make those heads anymore. So they're great, but unfortunately they break a lot, especially these days. Unfortunately, you get people that did not care at all about their Jeeps and they just ran it ragged. So all the people get the even with lower miles, they ended up still having to constantly fix them. So definitely, if you're going to get a Jeep Cherokee, know that you're going to be spending a lot of time fixing it too.
Yeah, definitely valid points there. But you gotta love those old Jeeps and what they brought to the table from a technology standpoint for its time. When you're talking about something you can really take 4 wheel drive or off roading, I should say, and it performs at a high level.
When you think about this, I had an oil change and I was on a trip to Flagstaff from Mesa, Arizona, and my oil light came on, and I didn't understand. It had been when I slightly had gone off roading, but I was worried. But I drove all the way home, and when I went to check further, I had no oil in my Jeep. So I drove all the way up to Flagstaff, all the way back, and there was no damage, no problem.
Yeah, it
I
just
can't even get my wrap my head
no,
around
no.
it.
There's no way to wrap your head around that. And you're looking at, what is that usually? Is that a 2.5 hour drive?
About that, almost
Yeah,
3 hours, depending.
probably closer to 3, right? And it's just unbelievable. Um, if you did that with a Chevy Cruze, I'm pretty sure that that engine would melt.
Yeah, it would be on the side of the road.
Yeah. So, anything last words about the Cherokee that we're talking about, 94 to 96 and 97 to 01?
If you're looking for a cheaper alternative to like a side by side, and you don't have to deal with all that other crap that you have to do with that, like having something to tow it, having a bigger vehicle to tow it. I mean, there's nothing else like having a Jeep, being able to drive to your destination in the vehicle, then going off roading, and then guess what? You can leave with the vehicle. I think with any 4 by vehicle, that's awesome, but just something about behind like a Jeep Wrangler, all that. It's marvelous.
It's a great shot about the side by side. They are cool, but the versatility is lacking. And on the way back, I bet you could even pick up some groceries.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. No, good stuff. And look, you'll see more details about the Jeeps, Cherokee specifically, in the newsletter. So thanks for sharing some insight and your experiences with the Cherokee. And I'm going to give a quick shout out that there's going to be a story also in our newsletter about a barn find in my home state. This vehicle was made infamous for being in a movie with Michael J. Fox, as well as being part of a huge cocaine drug deal and bust. So read about it in the newsletter, The Sprinkler. Do you want to guess what the car is, or do we not want to spoil that for the audience?
I mean, if you know that movie, you're gonna know.
Okay. All right, we're going to leave it at that, but a lot might not know about the cocaine side of that vehicle and its founder.
Sounds like you really know a lot about that.
Maybe I do. My nickname used to be Mr. Powder. All right,
Yikes.
so we're going to move ahead to some sports. Do you want me to jump into this one, Mr. Z?
Yeah, I feel like this should be in your avenue. I'll chime in if you talk about the
Okay,
Packers, but
let's call it in my ballpark. And so we're going to talk primarily, as we've mentioned before, about Wisconsin sports teams. That's near and dear to me, and we'll from time to time talk about the other teams as we make our way towards the championships in those respective major sports in the U.S.
yeah, what's happening on with the Diamondbacks right now?
So we can absolutely jump around. The Diamondbacks beat the Phillies in Game 7 last night in Philadelphia, and that puts them in the World Series against the Texas
Do you
Rangers.
know when the last time they went to the World Series?
2001.
Yes.
You were a youngin'.
That's insane, is it not?
It is, and the fact that they're back, and get this, the Milwaukee Brewers never been to a World Series, so that's tragedy there. And the Brewers lost to the Diamondbacks in Milwaukee in the best of five series when the Brewers had a much better record. I don't understand baseball from a standpoint of when it gets hot and where the momentum lies, like you can see in football and basketball, for instance. But yeah, the Brewers, they're looking to next year, most likely with a new manager. Craig Counsell headed out the door. I thought maybe the Mets, and if you recall, the Mets were Jerry Seinfeld's favorite team. It's interesting. I wrote that about Craig Counsell, and I barely dabble in baseball of any kind. And I wrote that probably 3 weeks ago. And then there was breaking news this morning that Craig Counsell is being interviewed and being offered a job by the New York Mets organization. Mr. Z brought up the Diamondbacks and going to the World Series. I wrote that piece about the Diamondbacks going to the World Series last night before the game ended.
Yeah, so it sounds like that he does a lot beforehand, but for some reason we've yet to win bets or the lottery.
No,
So
I know.
I don't think that's really helping
No,
mentioning that
that's
aspect.
thanks for chastising me. That's what sucks is that, sure, I didn't bet on either of those, and I won both. So real quick, let's run our way up through the Milwaukee Bucks. They look poised to start another championship season with the addition of Damian Lillard, also known as the Great Dame, and the season looks bright. Bucks.
But what you were telling me is that you didn't really seem to care for the new head coach.
Right. No, yeah, definitely. Great shout out there. So the Bucks kick off their regular season on the 26th of October, and it is Milwaukee against their arch rival, the 76ers. And I'm suspect of a new coach, and it's for two reasons, and I'll try to make it quick. So one is I've seen him in press conferences, and I'm not expecting somebody to necessarily be an expert orator. But the bottom line is you have to be able to handle yourself in press conferences. And for some reason, the three that I've watched, the coach, Adrian Griffin, he acts like he just got done eating a hard shell taco and he's talking to the press. It's just that turns me off immeasurably. But what I really am interested in, and I heard an expert on the NBA bring this up this past week, is the fact that Terry Stotts, so he was the assistant coach the Bucks brought in this season because Adrian is brand new to the Bucks as well. And he's never been a head coach in the league before. So they brought Terry in, and he was the coach for the Portland Trailblazers for 9 seasons. And yes, Damian Lillard was his player for those 9 seasons. So they thought, let's bolster this new head coach, new to head coaching, with an assistant that was a head coach for multiple years. He can give him some insight. Well, there was an incident during a shoot around a couple weeks ago, and supposedly Adrian, the head coach, was calling all the assistants in to talk to him. The assistant, Terry, was talking to Giannis and Damian, only two of the best players in the entire league. And Adrian, the head coach, got mad that he didn't come over right away when he was trying to say, hey, I'm talking to the two best players on the team. Ultimately, Terry resigned that night. And I think this is going to come back to haunt him. And I think it shows the character of that coach. And I don't like, you can't be thin skinned in professional sports. And I just think it was outrageous. So anything you want to shout out about that before I move into the Packers real quick?
You just talked about the food thing. I already have such disdain with food and people with their mouth open, chewing. I know it's not a great thing. It's a big flaw of mine, but I've tried my best to ignore it. But if I saw someone that, is supposed to be respectful and, talking to the media, I think that would give me the wrong impression. So I definitely can feel that.
Yeah, $1 billion organization. Excuse me. I'd rather see sorry, Harpo Marx of the Marx Brothers up there and not saying anything and using his horn to talk. So, real quick, we don't want to spend too much time on the Green Bay Packers. They've played 3 games in October due to an early bye. The third game has not been played yet. That will be Sunday the 29th, but they did lose at the Raiders miserably, 13-17. And then this past weekend, they lost at the Broncos was a must win. They choked against a horrible team, and their record, the Packers that is 2-4 heading into the last game of October. I always enjoy watching the games with Mr. Z, but the Packers look abysmal, and I don't believe love is the answer. Anything you want to say?
I don't think the coaching staff or Love is the answer. After watching a little bit of him play preseason, seeing him in practice, I just they talked about how they practice his footwork. I don't think his footwork is the problem. I think it's his decision making on the field, where he constantly throws into two or more coverage. That's
Double,
insane.
triple coverage.
And when the moments of time that you really need to play really well, he just tosses it willy nilly and intercepted. And that's been every game. And this last game was the most close it's been, but they didn't score any points yet again in the first half. It's insane. You're an NFL team and you're supposed to be good, but even though the defense give up those points, anything I could say the strong point is it's the defense is okay, and I'm scared every time the offense steps on the field. So that's not a good thing.
No, it isn't. It's a good summary, and I think we're in agreement that in the NFL, if your defense holds that team to less than 21 points in today's NFL, you got to win that game. So definitely a rough season for Packers fans. I had hope because I knew there'd be growing pains, but I see regression. That's not good. Let's run through some more sports really fast. Let's give a shout out to the WNBA Las Vegas Aces. The Women's National Basketball Association won the championship in October, and they are back-to-back champions. Major League Baseball, we did talk about the fact that the Rangers beat the Astros, and the Diamondbacks unexpectedly beat the Phillies. They'll be facing off in the World Series. First pitch is October 27th in Texas. We have a couple of stories on Aaron Rodgers in our newsletter for October, and we'll also have an editorial on the Green Bay Packers the last 25 years. And is Matt LaFleur really the answer? We're going to jump into some wellness now. We continue to speak about being cool to one another. What does that look like to you, Mr. Z, being cool to one another?
It's not jumping to conclusions. It's not, interrupting or not listening through and through what the other person's saying. And it's definitely hearing them out. If anything, tell them how you feel back. And even if you don't agree, to just let that be. And that's okay. Because unfortunately, or good, you're never going to always agree with stuff. And that's just the way that conversations go.
Yeah, definitely active listening. Let's stop narcissism. Engage with the people that you interact with, and it'll be a better place. So definitely good stuff there. We also preach being good and kind to ourselves. Super important. It sounds wonky or hokey to some, but if you're not good to yourself, you're probably not going to be good to others. So really take that approach. Quick 3 myths about being happy. Happiness is a feeling. It's really more about enjoying things, feeling full or satisfied, and what does happiness mean to you. It's not really a feeling per se. Having issues and challenges in life are why you aren't happy. That's definitely another myth. It's untrue. It may be cliche, but we make our own happiness. Live in the moment. And having a goal or target of being happy, hey, my goal is I want to be happy. It's not practical and can be defeating. Searching for happiness is like chasing a tiger's tail. We can be happier. It's more of a direction and leading the life we want and love. Any thoughts on that before we move into commentary, Mr. Z?
I I think that a lot of people these days are very depressed or sad or don't view things in the present, suck really in the past, think about the negativity. So if we can all try to have a little bit more positive and feeling a little bit more full, even just the little things, it's important to move forward and push ourselves to try to be a little bit more happier every day.
Definitely good stuff, and we've got more details on this, as well as some helpful links that can help with the whole happiness thing, the myths about being happy, and also just taking care of ourselves. We want our psychos to be happy. Commentary. So we move forward, and Mr. Z and I stay consistent about not speaking to politics and negative weather. In these unprecedented times, it's more important than ever that we live in the moment, as Mr. Z was giving a shout out to. Be present. Let those around us know we care about them and what they mean to us. Do this consistently, not as a flavor of the month. Helping others so many different ways: blood donations, volunteering, teaching, coaching, big brothers, big sisters, and even the donations to Salvation Army and the like. We can help each other. In and Out celebrates their 75th anniversary. So it's an interesting segue to helping people out, to helping our bellies, I guess. We will share more details about this and a few interesting facts about this iconic West Coast eatery in the newsletter. The comment about this iconic chain is that the burgers in the operation are consistent and good. In this day and age, that is something to say. Definitely did not expand their menu. They focus on quality and speed and never really tried In and Out until they opened one up at the Fiesta Mall pad around the year 2000. And we've talked about that iconic location and the fact that it's being demolished, the mall that is, but In and Out still stands strong. Any reflections on In and Out you want to share with the audience, Mr. Z?
It's still something that I infrequently always go to if you want a quick, good burger and you know exactly what to expect. Even at their slow times, their fast times, I mean, pretty much always, everything is tastes the same. And I can still say, from the first time I had it, still tastes exactly the same as it
Nice.
does right now.
Yeah. No, good stuff. Consistency. So I'm going to run through some practical life skills real quick. Definitely can see more details about these things when we get into the newsletter, but we're going to kick it off with a tasty recipe from Mr. Z, our resident chef. Tell us about your high protein chicken quesadilla. Can you give the audience a quick rundown on that recipe?
Yeah, what I like to do is I put the chicken breast in the oven, but I season it, whatever seasons you would do like on chicken, especially something towards a quesadilla side, if you will. And then once out of the oven, I do cut into it once it's cooled. I use a sharp knife, and what I switched to is having these Mission carb balanced tortillas and sun dried tomatoes. They have a spinach and herb one, I believe, as well. Those are both great. Then I use a pan with butter, real butter that is, and a little bit, half a tablespoon.
Yeah, no margarine here.
Yeah, and then I let it, cook there for a little bit. Then I put the tortilla and heat it on both sides. Then I put low moisture mozzarella cheese because it's in high protein. And then I add the chicken on top of that. And then you got to add your sauce of choice. I layer it with black beans because I believe it adds great taste and texture. And I use canned because that's the easiest. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. And I make sure everything's all warm and gooey.
Yes.
And then I fold
Yummy.
the tortilla in half and then I cut it with a pizza cutter.
I,
It's smart and tasty and it's quick.
yeah, I like that tip about using a pizza cutter to cut it. And also, I know Mr. Z will add leftover rice or utilize Uncle Ben's rice pouches for added ingredients, almost chipotle like there. And I've had them before, and they are to die for. So great stuff. Full recipe will be available in our newsletter. And Mr. Z highly recommends finding an old school knife sharpening shop in your area and keeping your good knives sharp and ready. We share a story about a knife sharpening adventure in our hometown in an upcoming newsletter. And remember, keep ingredients off to one side except the cheese for folding. And canned beans are great. No need to heat separately. Lastly, this recipe can be for back-to-back days. Heat those chicken pieces in a separate pan after that initial use. Never microwave chicken. And from the auto side, Mr. Z and I preach a clean car is a happy car. This saying is overused, but so very true. Our take on that old saying, a clean car is a happy owner. We know many drivers travel alone most of the time. Why not enjoy a clean, organized, and nice smelling vehicle? Mr. Z has noticed a lot of vehicles out there and their owners use of the passenger seat and even the floor mat as a garbage station. Looks bad, smells bad. What about the next time you have a passenger? A simple fix is to purchase a car trash bin and our car organizer. Sorry, I should say, or car organizers. These can be found at Walmart and Amazon. Amazon is called a car trash bin and it attaches to any vehicle console and has built in pouches for staying organized. We are in our vehicles a lot. Not only is a clean car a better car, it helps us with our well being and feeling good about a space we occupy frequently. One last tidbit Mr. Z dropped this one for me as well. After getting organized inside the auto, how about making it smell nice too? You've got a couple suggestions for that, Mr. Z. What do you got?
Yeah, there's the scent disc at Bath and Body Works, and they also sell the holder that they go into. They smell really strong and they work for a while, but to me, I feel like the scent doesn't last as long as something I did find at Walmart, and Amazon does sell them definitely, but there's these like little bean bags.
They almost look like little old potato sacks.
Yeah, they do. But there's like little beads inside there and they're all scented and you can get a variety of different smells and they're great. I started keeping those in my vehicles and they last a while.
Yeah, good stuff. The smell is definitely important when you're wrapping it up. I know we're running a little bit long. We can get this wrapped up in 3 to 4 minutes, so we're going to go a little over today. That's on me. Mr. Z keeps barking at me, and I'm trying to push forward and edit myself, but sometimes I do talk too much, and Mr. Z will verify that. He's going to share specific products in our upcoming newsletters. The sprinkler will have some links in the newsletter, so it makes it easy for you to find those products. I'm going to run through some of these headlines, Mr. Z. Love to have you chime in if you have any thoughts. States with legal marijuana see significant and sizable reductions in health insurance premiums. Found that kind of odd. A study that spans data from over a decade in the International Journal of Drug Policy found that states with legal Mary Jane enjoyed healthy reductions in health insurance premiums compared to those that did not honor legal weed. The federal government recommended that marijuana be legal nationwide. This is so smart. For starters, this can really help scientists that are researching medical benefits of marijuana, THC. Additionally, it can help all the vendors who sell cannabis by affording them to use normal banking practices.
And a huge thing is all the people wrongfully or put into jail or prison for that matter for a really long time for having it and it's illegal where they are. Just insane that you can be in one state and it's fine and you go to another one. Just seems insane that it wouldn't be all states by now. It truly is insane to me.
It is. It's almost by definition insanity, and we could talk about this for hours, but the fact that there is a plant, it grows out of the ground, and it's been illegal is outrageous. Moving right along, California is practically drought free thanks to increased rainfall, along with all the rain from Tropical Storm Hillary, and that's with one L. There is no truth to the rumor Hillary Clinton demanded they remove one of the L's in Hillary when naming the storm. Sorry. Oddly enough, California still struggles with capturing the rainwater from storms. The majority of the rainwater simply bleeds into the ocean. The Golden State's government is researching ways to capture and utilize the rainwater to help in times of drought. You think? Boston doctor accused of sexually assaulting 120 women, excessive examinations. Dr. Derek Todd has been busy. A rheumatologist conducted pelvic, breast, and rectal exams solely for his sexual gratification. This abhorrent behavior took place as far back as 2011 and continued through 2023. The hospital terminated him at the end of July this year after an initial investigation. He very well may be getting unwanted exams in prison. A teacher showed fourth graders the movie Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. This can only happen in Florida? The charter school in Miami has not confirmed that the twisted teacher will be able to continue to teach at that particular school. That movie is unrated or a hard R. Where is IOR when you need him? By the way, as I said, the movie is extremely graphic and violent. Any thoughts on that one, Mr. Z?
I've heard conflicting stories about that. So it's he like knew about it or he
The teacher?
didn't,
Yeah.
and he just continued to show it. So
Oh,
it's hard to say at
he's
this moment in
pleading
time.
ignorance?
I think that's where it's at right now.
Yeah, whatever. All right, so moving right along, Jordan Vandersloot confesses to brutally murdering Natalie Holloway, if I can talk, in 2005. This case captured America's attention, and what many feared to be true was indeed fact. We hope this will bring family and friends closure regarding this tragic end of such a young life. Natalie was 18 years old at the time. We'll have more on this in our newsletter. NASA's first asteroid return sample is a goldmine of life sustaining materials. NASA also launched a space probe to mine and return priceless minerals from an asteroid that will take 6 years just to reach that asteroid. Any thoughts on those NASA missions?
I love outer space, and I remember talking to you about when I learned about this, and I have been following that first one for a really long time. Just the videos on that alone are worth a watch if you love space stuff. It's just, you know, hoping one day we do finally get the answer. Are we alone or are we not? It would be crazy if we are, but I think that's also what keeps us motivated and moving forward with space and trying to be multiplanetary. With the fact, like, are we really the only one? And if we are, well, we got to reach out there, and then by eventually we won't be. You know,
Yeah, no, good stuff, right? There's so many questions along with a lack of answers in that realm. It is unbelievably fascinating. So definitely look up about NASA and their activities. Couple more things. Nearly 1 million worth of cocaine was found on a beach in Florida by a person just walking the beach. The coke weighed 67 pounds and had a supposed street value of $970,000. Talk about a white wedding. And lastly, on a much lighter note, Netflix mailed out their last DVDs at the end of September. They started sending the DVDs out as the first iteration of their business model 25 years ago. Any thoughts on Netflix and that last DVD?
I was with Blockbuster, and then I was with Netflix, and I definitely was engulfed in being able to choose the movies you wanted to see and rent them and send them back. It was such a convenient, low costly thing, way cheaper than it is to even
Ooh,
monthly stream. I
yeah,
know you get way more, maybe, by viewing that
maybe.
kind of stuff nowadays, but it's just it's sad, but that is the way of the world. We're moving fast, and DVDs are long gone.
Yeah, it's all about digital, that's for sure, and not having those hardware items that you can hold in your hand. We're gonna get close to ending this. We do want to really quick go over our interesting individual of the month. This is a real person or fictional character, and we'll visit one each month. Last month, our interesting individual was brought to us by Mr. Z, and it was Benjamin Franklin. This month, our second most interesting individual is Alfred Hitchcock. Born 1899, passed away in 1980, so lived a long life, known as a master director, movies and subjects that changed film, as Mr. Z mentioned earlier when we kicked this off with one of Hitch's famous quotes. Think about movies Rope, Psycho, Vertigo, The Birds, Rear Window, North by Northwest, Frenzy. I just named the ones that I really am enamored with. He was also known as a womanizer and very difficult as a person and director. We'll share more about good old Hitchcock in our newsletter. Mr. Z, any thoughts on Hitchcock?
He's one of those. There's directors out there like you can see some of their movies, and you're like, yeah, I see what it's about, but I think they're overrated. But you talk about him, you gotta see his whole library. I don't, some are less than others, but I mean, he grew as a director. But I think they're all definitely worth your time to sit down and at least watch once.
Yeah, for sure. Brilliant filmmaking, and you had mentioned it earlier, changing the way movies are shot. Ask Brian De Palma, who basically took Hitch's methodology and made quite a career for himself, including the first Mission Impossible. So, signing off, we definitely want to thank everybody for listening to episode 3 of Psycho Studios podcast. We're going to end each episode with a takeaway from the content shared. And for me, my takeaway is Avenged Sevenfold. A lot of good things in this particular podcast, but I loved going to that concert with Mr. Z, and they rocked and gave me hope that rock and roll might not be dead yet. Mr. Z, your takeaway?
Just a little bit about that wellness. I definitely feel like I hear it from my friends and family. Just the they just seem all unhappy, and like we'll talk about in the newsletter and what we kind of just briefly touched on here is if we can all try just to live a little bit happier lives. I think that could definitely, I know that sounds more simpler than it is, but taking some time for ourselves is what I really mean. Just try to be a little bit easier on yourself and know that you're human and we all make mistakes. And if we can just all try to get along, at least with our friends and family, that would do so much better for yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving a shout out about the wellness piece and definitely living in the moment. You've given me a lot of that living in the moment, and it is so important. We'd love to hear from our audience. Comments, feedback, and suggestions are welcome. You can email us at psychostudios66, that's all one word and it's plural, at gmail.com. You can reach us at our website. What's our website?
It's psycho-studio.com.
One more time.
Psycho-studio.com.
Nice. Everything I guess you could say is a work in progress. The website really does rock and roll. It's best viewed on a laptop or desktop. You can definitely access it by mobile, and we continue to work on all the different aspects that our entertainment hub has: podcast, newsletter, website, and of course, our TV film production. We make announcements on Instagram and X when we drop new content. Be safe and stay psycho.